Whatever did this, it's still here. The air felt dense, thick with an oppressive stillness that pressed down on my chest. Each breath rasped inside my helmet. The faint hiss of my oxygen feed the only sound in the suffocating quiet. The corridor stretched ahead like a jagged scar, its walls covered in deep gashes that gleamed faintly in the flickering red glow of the emergency lights. Pipes hung loose from the ceiling, dripping icy condensation that splattered rhythmically against the grated floor below. The flashlight mounted on my helmet sliced through the darkness, illuminating fragments of chaos, twisted conduits spilling cables like entrails, shattered glass that glittered like frozen tears, and dark streaks of something viscous and oily, smeared along the walls. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been quick or clean. The first body floated ahead, suspended in the freezing air like a macabre sculpture. Its arms hung limply at its sides, the legs slightly bent, as though frozen mid-step. The suit was shredded, deep gashes cutting through the fabric, exposing pale, frost-bitten flesh beneath. The visor was shattered, jagged edges framing a face contorted in an expression of sheer terror, its mouth open in a silent scream. Blood globules hung around it, suspended in the zero gravity like crimson pearls, some frozen solid, others still shimmering faintly in the weak light. They trailed lazily toward the walls, leaving faint smears where they had brushed the icy metal. I forced myself to move closer, my mag boots clinking softly with every step. My light passed over more wreckage, catching glimpses of torn fabric and the jagged edges of another helmet, partially buried under a pile of collapsed wiring. Another body lay nearby, twisted and pinned against the bulkhead, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. The chest cavity was torn open, jagged edges of bone protruding from the ruin of flesh and suit material. I stopped, unable to look away, my breath fogging the inside of my visor as the cold seeped into my bones. The markings on the walls near the bodies caught my eye. Long, parallel grooves cut deep into the metal, as though something massive had clawed its way through the station. The corridor ahead stretched on into deeper shadows, but even from here, I could see the faint outlines of more bodies. Some were intact, floating lifelessly, while others were barely recognizable, their forms torn apart and scattered among the debris. The stench grew stronger, clawing its way through the filters in my helmet, a nauseating blend of iron, rot, and something sharp and acidic that burned the back of my throat. I swallowed hard, gripping my weapon tighter. The station felt alive, the silence thick with an unseen presence. I stepped over a severed arm, the edges of its suit cleanly sliced as though by an impossibly sharp blade, and moved deeper into the corridor, the weight of what I might find pressing down on me with every step. The corridor widened into a larger chamber, the walls arching upward into darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. My boots thudded softly against the grated floor as I moved forward, each step slower than the last. The silence was almost unbearable now, a vacuum of sound that seemed to press against my eardrums despite the steady hiss of my oxygen feed. The bodies were more numerous here. They floated in unnatural stillness, their limbs twisted as if caught mid-struggle. Frost clung to their visors, obscuring their faces, but the damage to their suits told the story clearly enough. Most had been slashed open, their contents spilling out flesh, wiring, coolant, all mixing together into grotesque sculptures of chaos. I scanned the area with trembling hands, the beam of my flashlight revealing more wreckage. A torn escape pod lay embedded in the far wall, its hatch forced open from the outside. The edges were curled outward, bent and twisted like they'd been peeled apart by something with terrifying strength. The floor beneath me creaked faintly, the sound startlingly loud in the silence. I froze, my flashlight snapping downward to reveal cracks running through the metal panels. They weren't random. They radiated outward in intricate, spiraling patterns as though etched deliberately. The grooves were filled with a faintly glowing residue, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. The sight sent a chill down my spine, colder than the air around me. I stepped over a fallen support beam, careful to avoid the glowing lines, and turned my focus back to the bodies. One of them had drifted closer, spinning lazily as it floated just above the floor. Its visor was intact, but the glass was smeared with a dark, viscous fluid that obscured the face beneath. My flashlight caught the faint glint of its dog tags as they dangled from the shredded remains of its suit. I reached out hesitantly, my gloved fingers, brushing the cold metal, and turned the tag over. The name was unreadable, the engraving worn smooth, but the insignia of the station was still visible, a stylized falcon perched on a crescent moon. I let the tag drop and stepped back, my boot dislodging a loose shard of metal. The sound echoed too loudly, bouncing off the walls and fading into the dark. That was when I noticed it. The air had changed. It wasn't silent anymore. A faint clicking sound began to rise from somewhere in the chamber, soft at first but growing steadily louder. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock or the tapping of claws on metal. My pulse quickened, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The flashlight beam jittered as my hand trembled, sweeping across the room in wide arcs. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, impossible to pin down. The glowing lines on the floor pulsed faster now, their light intensifying. The clicking grew louder, closer, reverberating through the chamber like a predator announcing its arrival. I backed away instinctively, my boots slipping slightly on the frost-slicked floor. The beam of my flashlight caught a glimpse of movement in the far corner of the room, something shifting just beyond the edge of the light, its form indistinct but undeniably there. I stopped breathing, the clicking now deafening in my ears. The darkness ahead seemed to ripple, and then, it came.